My husband Orion Whitfield and I built Whitfield Software from a card table in a rented duplex outside Columbus, Ohio. He drank his coffee black, always out of the same chipped mug with a faded Ohio State logo. Elbows on the table until 2 in the morning while I did the books by lamplight. That devotion carried us for 11 years. Then success came, and something in him started leaving the room before he did. Now, let me back up. My name is Aurora Hale. I go by Whitfield these days, though that's about to change. I'm 38. I've been an accountant since I was 24, first for a mid-size firm on High Street, then for myself, then for the two of us. I learned to keep records from my grandmother, Eloan Hale. She kept the books for half the businesses in our town for 40 years, by hand, in ledgers with cracked spines. She used to say it while she worked, not as advice, just as fact. Paper remembers what people forget. The year before she died, she gave me her old fountain pen, silver, worn smooth where her thumb used to sit. I still use it. I used it on the letter that ended up in a judge's hands, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I met Orion when we were 23. He had a business plan and $400. I had a steady paycheck and more patience than sense. He wanted to build software for small manufacturers, the kind of unglamorous, invisible work nobody writes magazine articles about. Everyone told him it was too risky. I didn't. We married 2 years later at the courthouse on Front Street. Not because we couldn't afford better, but because he said he didn't want to spend money on a party when he could spend it on the company. I agreed. I believed in the company. I believed in him more. The early years were lean. Some months the business made almost nothing. I remember one January where the heat in our apartment cycled on twice before 6 and Orion sat at that card table doing math that never balanced, and I sat across from him with my grandmother's pen, doing math that did. We're going to get through this, I told him. He'd nod, and some nights he'd reach across and hold my hand without saying anything, which told me more than any of his speeches did. That was Orion at his best. Quiet, grateful, present. I want you to know that because it matters later. I covered the mortgage. I covered groceries and health insurance and more than once payroll. I put off graduate school twice. I drove the same Honda for 9 years past when I should have traded it in. Every sacrifice felt like an investment because he kept saying the same thing. One day, all of this is going to be ours. I believed him. I wrote it down in a way. Not the words. The dates. The dollar amounts. The withdrawals. My grandmother's habit had become mine without my noticing. I didn't know it then, but the first thread had already come loose. I just wasn't the kind of person who pulled on things until I was sure. In year 7, one of Orion's products caught on with a distributor out of Dayton. And within 18 months, Whitfield Software wasn't a card table anymore. It was 3 floors of a building on Gay Street. Magazine profiles. A stage at a conference in Austin. Suddenly everyone wanted to shake his hand. I was proud of him. You have to understand that. Watching someone you love finally get what they worked for is its own kind of good feeling. Until the good feeling started running out. He stopped asking how my day went. Dinners became him talking about investors while I nodded. He hired 3 assistants for the office, and somehow still expected me to run the house alone. When I mentioned finally going back for my CPA certification, he didn't even look up. Why? Just that. One word. You don't need it now, he said. Seems unnecessary. I let that sit for a long time before I said anything back. Then that spring, something shifted the other way. He came home early 3 nights running. He asked about the CPA program again, unprompted, and said he'd cover the tuition. He found my grandmother's fountain pen where I'd left it in the junk drawer, and had it re-inked without me asking. Set it back on my desk like nothing. You should be using this, he said. It's a good pen. For about 6 weeks, it felt like the early years again. He held my hand at the table without me reaching for his first. I let my guard all the way down. I even signed up for the fall CPA cohort. Then the trips started again, more of them, further out, with less notice. Weekend plans got canceled over the phone in a hallway with the door half shut. Every question I asked got the same 3 answers. You're overthinking it. It's just work. You worry too much. I was raised to keep things in the family. To not make a scene out of a feeling I couldn't prove yet. So I did what I was raised to do. I kept quiet. And I started paying attention. The way my grandmother taught me to pay attention to a column of numbers that didn't add up. Hotel charges on a card that didn't match any conference on his calendar. A password on his laptop that had never existed before. A friend from the office, Ren Delacroix, calling to ask carefully if everything was all right at home, because she'd seen something in the building lobby she didn't know what to do with. I told her I'd handle it. I didn't tell her how. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother's pen and a blank legal pad, and for the first time in 11 years, I started keeping a different kind of record. What I found over the next few months would end up fitting into one sealed envelope. But it took me a long time to understand that the man reading my numbers wrong for years wasn't going to be Orion. It was going to be a judge. I didn't go looking for the truth. It found me while I was doing something as ordinary as organizing receipts. It was a Sunday in October. I was sorting paperwork for our accountant, sorting the way I always sorted, by month, by category, everything in its place. That's when I found it, tucked behind a stack of utility bills in the drawer, where Orion kept his travel folders. A hotel confirmation. The Fairmont, downtown Cincinnati. 2 nights, a date in September. I checked his calendar out of habit more than suspicion. There was no conference in Cincinnati that week. There was nothing in Cincinnati that week at all. I set the paper down on the kitchen table. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. I sat there for a while with my hand flat on the counter, the way you do when you need the counter to still be solid even if nothing else is. 2 weeks later, I was in the upstairs hallway outside our bedroom, and I heard his voice through the door, low, the way people talk when they think no one's listening. I'll handle the divorce soon, he said. I just need everything positioned first. A second voice answered, quieter. I recognized it. Sombra Voss worked 2 floors down from Orion's office. I'd shaken her hand at a company picnic once. She complimented my potato salad. I didn't move from the hallway. I didn't make a sound. It wasn't the wanting a divorce that stopped my breath. It was the word positioned. Like I was a line item he needed to move before closing the books. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room until the sky outside the window went from black to gray to that pale early color that isn't really a color at all. Somewhere around 5 in the morning, I stopped waiting for him to change his mind, because I understood he'd already made it up. You know that feeling when you've been patient for so long that patience itself starts to feel like the mistake. I went looking for my grandmother's pen. I found it in the drawer where I always kept it, and I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and I started writing dates. Not accusations. Dates. Amounts. What I'd paid, and when, and what he'd said about it at the time. Paper remembers. By the time the sun came up all the way, I had 4 pages. By the time I was done 3 months later, I had a folder nearly 3 inches thick. I didn't decide to fight that morning in the kitchen. I decided to be ready, which is a different thing entirely. The next day, I called an attorney named Marlo Reyes. Her office was small, on the 2nd floor above a bakery on 3rd Street, and she had a way of listening that didn't perform sympathy, she just took notes. I set the folder on her desk. She opened it, went quiet for a minute, and looked up. You kept all of this? I've always believed paper tells the truth, I said. Eventually. Word got back to me the way it does in a town where everyone knows everyone. Ren Delacroix called to say Orion had been telling people at the office I'd never see a dime of the company, that he'd built it alone, that I'd contributed nothing but time. I thanked her for telling me and didn't say much else. The truth didn't need me to defend it out loud yet. The morning of the hearing, Orion walked into the courtroom in a suit that cost more than our first car. Sombra sat in the gallery behind his table, arms crossed, comfortable. He leaned toward me before the judge came in. You should have settled when I offered. I didn't answer him. Judge Ellis Calloway took the bench, and Orion's attorney stood first, laying out the same story Orion had been telling everyone for weeks. Self-made. Self-funded. My contribution, in his words, not meaningful. Orion nodded along like he believed it. Maybe by then he did. Marlo stood, calm, and walked one sealed envelope up to the clerk's desk. This was prepared by my client, she said. A documented timeline of financial contributions, with records already in discovery. Judge Calloway opened it and started to read. I watched his eyes move down the first page, stop, go back up, move again. Inside in my grandmother's pen were the dates. March, a withdrawal from my savings to cover payroll, when an investor pulled out. September, refinancing my car so the household could carry more of the business's weight. February, the semester of graduate school I didn't take. And under the dates, 3 lines Orion had written to me himself, years ago. In emails I'd kept without knowing why. I couldn't have kept the company alive without you. Someday everything we build will belong to both of us. Every investor meeting is possible because you're keeping everything else together. The judge looked up. Mr. Whitfield, you testified the business was self-funded after its first year. That's correct, Orion said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Then explain this deposit. The judge held up a bank record. It matches to the dollar, a withdrawal from Mrs. Whitfield's personal savings on the same date. Orion's attorney leaned in and whispered something. Orion didn't answer right away. The room stayed quiet the way a room gets quiet right before something changes. These aren't accusations, the judge said, setting the letter down gently. They're dates. I appreciate a clear timeline. He ordered a full review of the financial disclosures before any division of assets would be finalized. It wasn't a verdict yet. But it was the first time all morning that Orion didn't look certain of anything. 3 weeks later, the review confirmed what the folder already knew. The court divided the marital assets according to the documented record, not according to who told the story louder. Outside the courthouse, Orion caught up to me on the steps. I was wrong, he said. I told myself none of it counted once the company took off. It did. I know, I said. There wasn't anger left to spend on it. Just the quiet of something finally being finished. I helped because I loved you, I told him. Not for credit. He nodded, like he finally understood the difference. People sometimes ask if I felt something like triumph when the settlement came through. I didn't. Triumph would have meant I was still measuring myself against him. And by then I wasn't. What I wanted was never revenge. Revenge keeps you looking backward, and I'd spent enough years doing that without meaning to. What I wanted was simple. I wanted the truth on the record, in ink, the way my grandmother would have wanted it. Paper remembers. The settlement was fair. Not generous, not a headline, just fair. Instead of a bigger house or a trip I didn't need, I did the thing I'd put off twice for someone else's dream. I opened my own firm. 3 rooms above the same bakery on 3rd Street where Marlo's office sits, helping small, family-run businesses keep their books honest before honesty becomes a courtroom problem. The first client who walked through my door was a young woman with a business plan and not much money. Sitting across from me the way I used to sit across from Orion at that card table. I gave her the same thing my grandmother gave me. Not advice really. Just a habit. Write it down. All of it. Especially the parts that feel too small to matter. I filed the paperwork to go back to Hale a month after the settlement closed. It wasn't dramatic. I just signed my name the way I'd started signing it in my head months earlier. Back when I first sat at that kitchen table with a legal pad and a fountain pen that used to belong to someone who never doubted me. Have you ever kept something quiet for years, not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the right moment to say it once and have it matter? Tell me about it. I read every comment. My grandmother used to say paper remembers what people forget. I'd add one thing to that now. So does the person who kept it.